Good to go? Cool. Hello, everyone. Great to be at ECC. I was here last year, and first time in Cannes, which is also really fun. I'm going to talk about network states in 2025. And this is not my day job. My day job is I work for a crypto insurance company. We do a lot of crypto insurance. It's a little bit tangentially related to network states, but this is really like a passion project of mine. Network states have been around. I mean, Balaji created the term in 2020 and sort of started, he published a book in 2022. So the concept of network states is, as a named thing, is pretty recent, but the idea behind it and the ideas behind it are decades, maybe centuries old. It's very interesting, but as network states are defined, I have a little bit more expansive definition than Balaji's definition, but this is a pretty good one. Basically, a network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. And I think that's pretty good, but I think that's a destination, and I think what's actually more interesting is how you get there. And how you get there is going to determine really how the thing works. As far as I'm concerned, these are deeply tied to crypto. First question is, who has heard of network states before in the audience? Okay, so pretty. But I think we all agree that they're pretty deeply tied to crypto. Like, without crypto, it's very difficult, either cryptocurrency or cryptography generally, it's very difficult to have people cooperate at a distance online. And really the enabling technologies for these things, there's multiple enabling technologies, but cryptography and cryptocurrency are two of the more critical ones. Balaji is certainly a central role in a lot of this stuff. He created it. He has a venture fund doing it. He's behind a couple of the big projects in the space. He was formerly the CTO at Coinbase, did some genetic stuff, has a really long and interesting technical history, and as a very prolific user of the internet. So you see a lot of stuff that he's posted online. I was part of the Cypherpunks group back in the 1990s, the mailing list that was created in like 93. I joined in 94. I was like 15 years old. It was a group of people that were talking about what the world would be like once we had cryptography widely deployed, and wasn't called crypto. Well, it was cryptocurrency. I don't know. We used mostly the term eCash at the time, but basically anonymous online digital payments. They were centralized instead of decentralized was the main difference. And then I got involved in seasteading, which is another area that's sort of like one of the precursors of network states. I was the CTO at this company called Havenco that did the data center on a tiny World War II abandoned anti-aircraft platform in the North Sea that the British had abandoned that declared itself sovereign in 1967, and we ran a data center there from like 1999 to 2002, which is pretty interesting. And then there's a whole bunch of libertarian social movements that have happened around the world. There's also whether a group of people leaving where they're from to go create something new somewhere else, there are precedents in the real world historically. There's like the people settling uncharted territory, colony, diaspora communities, things like that. There's also a lot of precedents in the pre-crypto or physical sort of space. What I'm interested in is mostly what's happening. I think a lot of interesting stuff has happened in the past, but I think the most interesting stuff is what's happening now and what's happening in the future, and what is impeding, what things need to be built to get to where we need to be. And I think we have a lot of trends from 2025 that sort of build a lot of motivation for why this stuff is going to be popular. It's both positive and negative, but I'd say nationalism has really re-emerged politically around the world. There's a lot of countries, the US especially, but all around the world that really care about their borders, are enforcing their borders and a lot of their physical borders in a lot of ways that they hadn't before. Also enforcing digital borders, like China with the Great Firewall in the late 90s, early 2000s was like a leader in this space of basically cutting themselves off from the world and connecting only in very limited ways. A lot of other places do that by default by having a different language than everyone else. So like the internet that's used in languages that are not like top 10 languages is fairly self-contained and unique on its own. So if you might have a social media company that wins in that particular space, and that becomes sort of a closed community there. Another big thing that's happened is travel permissions and like the process of traveling. I travel like 200 days a year, and travel post-COVID has become such a hassle for most people in relative to what it was in 1999. I'd say 1999 was the peak of easy travel across a lot of borders. There's a lot of pre-registration required in various places. Things like the US ESTA, UK ETA, Australia ETA, ETIAS, even for visa-free countries. A lot of countries are losing their visa-free status, so visas and other permissions are increasing, so the physical permeability is decreasing. Remote work is definitely here to stay. Like there was a period where, I mean, I worked remotely for like, what, 25 years or whatever, but remote work has become pretty common. There was, it got pushed. I mean, COVID certainly accelerated it from 2020 to like 2022 or so, but then there was a pushback on it from some organizations, but I think that's mostly been pushed back against. So the counter-revolution has like pushed, and remote work, or at least hybrid work, is here to stay, and that becomes a major thing. And there's a lot of regulatory arbitrage. There's a lot of regulatory regimes that are very different in different locations, either on how easy it is to build stuff or how easy it is to run certain kinds of businesses. So rather than going to the one world government model that a lot of people have been afraid of, there is definitely a difference in how certain countries run certain things, and subnational entities, like even within the United States, like which state you're in determines a lot of laws, and also how easy it is to build. What community you live in a local area also determines how easy it is to build, and a lot of that stuff has just been accelerating. And a lot of people are moving because of these other things, because they have the ability to work remotely, everything else, they can take advantage of this. There's the perpetual tourist, or the perpetual traveler, the nomad lifestyle, things like that are pretty common along a lot of people, especially in the crypto space. And then there are projects where I've worked with people for like 3 years and never met them in person, then we finally met up, so things like that. So that's a pretty big, there's a lot of trends that exist in the current space. What's happening now in the network space? I mean, the biggest thing is still conferences, both like traditional conferences, talks at conferences like this, and then like the Zuzalu type conferences that we had. There was a conference in Montenegro a couple years ago. There have been a couple successor events. There's the ZooPass. There's a lot of cool stuff like that. Vitalik was involved in the creation of Zuzalu, a lot of other people involved from the Ethereum community. So there's a very tight Ethereum crossover there. And then Balaji's project, Network School, which I got to attend last year. It's amazing. In Singapore, which is a great city on its own, there's a tiny little, like a causeway, and then the part of Malaysia that's right across the straits from Singapore is called Johor Bahru. It's a town that, like before Singapore broke off, it was much more connected to Singapore, but it's basically it was a crazy real estate bubble. Like there was a Chinese real estate bubble where they built like millions of units of housing there, and 9,000 people lived there for about like 5 years. It's a complete wasteland. And then people have been trying to find stuff to do with it. He was able to rent a large tower hotel and do a cool thing where hundreds of people came working on their own projects. They had like Brian Johnson, the life extension crazy guy, with like nutty food products that he eats and all the other treatments, and a lot of other cool stuff that's going on there. So sort of like experimenting in physical space with the kind of stuff that people experiment with online, and the cost of living is very low. Visas are very easy to get. It's a great place. And he has a conference every 2 years, the Network State, or every year. He's had it in Amsterdam. It's usually right before or after the Solana conference. There was one in Amsterdam. There was one in Singapore last year. Certainly not going to announce that he's going to have another conference, because he hasn't announced that he's going to have another conference, but there is a Solana conference that conveniently has a day right after it in October this year in Singapore, so there's very high likelihood of a conference. And there, they do a pretty good job of showing the 30 or 40 projects that are happening in the space. There's a sort of a tension between building something that's really capital intensive, really big, requires a lot of effort, which takes a lot of time, or doing something that is fast and gets immediate feedback and gets a lot of people to respond. And you really do want to have an ecosystem with a lot of experiments, but you do need to also have some big wins. Some of the biggest things that have happened in this space did predate the network state terminology, but are very much philosophically network state. Prospero, which is so British Honduras is an island that is off the coast of Honduras, became part of Honduras like decades ago or whatever. It's always been sort of a different place. Honduras is Honduran people are great, everything else, but Honduras as a country is incredibly challenged, like from a security and economic perspective. And like my company would require that I have security detail to go into downtown and stuff. So it is a tiny little island that is off the coast that is very, very safe, lots of tourism, everything else pre-existed. Some people created a set of laws, laws that can do like a charter city kind of law, where you're allowed to have a municipal government that is essentially privately owned, that owns some territory and has the ability to be a municipal government, like a town government within that town. And they created a interesting place. They took over a resort that had been abandoned during COVID, or like it was bankrupt during COVID. So they have a lot of physical infrastructure there, golf course, a lot of biotech research, which is a niche that's very interesting there. Lots of cool stuff happening there. It's been a physical place that's been happening for a while. They are unfortunately having a lot of legal and contractual disputes with the federal government of Honduras that are being litigated through federal, like international legal entities. So that's going on. And there's this big thing called the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is the way the US voting system works is you have like something, it's obviously a federal system, and there's a lot of states that are very small. There's some states that are like California, New York, Texas that are tens of millions, 50 million people. But then there's a lot of states. There's like 15 states that are about 1 million people each. And the thesis was if you move thousands of people, like 10,000, 20,000 people to a state that only has 1 million people, you can make a meaningful change in the demographics as far as voting and everything else of the state. People like libertarian political people created this maybe like, I don't know, like 20 years ago as a concept, and then created a contract where if everyone else moves, you're supposed to move too. A lot of people moved. New Hampshire was a state they picked. It's a small state near Boston, and they have been relatively successful. A friend of mine is actually a state legislator in that state now, and he's just like a sci-fi author, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, that's going on. So these things are happening, and there's progress, but it's certainly not progress to the same degree that like AI is having progress, or mobile phone computing had progress, or the internet had progress, or whatever else. It does seem like things are kind of stalled. DAOs, I mean, philosophically, I love DAOs, but I think there has not been there's been a lot of DAO not great, like covering themselves in glory situations. So I don't know that they have been the most successful part of cryptocurrency that has, in the crypto space that has existed to date. And the big thing that's missing is, why do people want a network state? There's a lot of this infrastructure of how you build a network state, everything else, but there's not a whole lot of what is the core reason that the network state exists. And until there is something that is so overwhelmingly interesting that people do genuinely want to participate in it, there's going to be a lot of experiments, but I don't think there's going to be a truly big success. And then that's how you get the early adopters, as a whole like Christensen curve of adoption. But you also need to have something that does hit escape velocity and has a lot of success. It doesn't necessarily need to be a super ambitious project. It just needs to be large scale and seen as successful. So it could be something that is an education-based community or something like that. There's a lot of cool stuff that could happen. And there is a lot of infrastructure, but the one thing that I've noticed from crypto from the past like 30 years is if there's a need for something to exist as an infrastructure project, people are very good at building it. They may not build it perfectly. There might be like 10 different versions that are funded by different VCs that are trying to build it. But generally, if infrastructure is needed, it does get built. So that exists. And obviously, we're all crypto people, and what can we do? I mean, obviously, crypto is a great source of capital for projects like this, and there's a lot of services that are provisioned through crypto that are great, and then participating. Like, a lot of us work remotely, we can participate in these kind of projects, and a lot of cool things. So mostly I wanted to have a discussion or some questions about things that people are interested in from network states, and specifically from the crypto perspective. But thank you.
Thank you. To put it in a very big nutshell, globally, a nation state would be some kind of online democracy. And therefore, how do you avoid, on the very long term, for those online democracies to just, as the physical democracies and governments, to just turn into dictators, or like where there's some kind of natural leaders that just appear, takes powers and stuff?
I think you don't prevent that. So that's a great question. I think you don't prevent that. The advantage of online is you can fork off and just leave if you find a community is bad. So certainly there's a lot of smaller scale things you can do to prevent negative political dynamics or personality cult or whatever else happening in a community. But if a community gets bad, you just you take your stuff and go do something else. And that's the great advantage that you don't have with physical space. One of the cool things about seasteading, like it's the idea of like living on like floating platforms on the sea that link up together, is the idea that you could build a house or a business or whatever else on a little structure, and then if a community gets bad, you move your house to another place. It's sort of like if you're living in like a nomadic like steppe culture instead of a farmer culture. If an area gets bad, you can leave. I think that is ultimately good. The problem is if you live in a place where everybody just leaves if there's a problem, then problems also happen. So like get to a certain scale. So there's an investment that people have in staying in a place that is important too. So yeah, unsolved problem. Like the fundamental problems of human political science are not solved by network states.
Thank you. If we want to set up a network state, it's really complex. There are a lot of component capabilities. What capabilities do you think would be a first minimal valuable state? You spoke about education, but do you have like other ideas about what would be something?
I think the things that have been the most successful so far from a online first are either fans of a certain person. Like honestly, Taylor Swift fans, if you just looked at Taylor Swift fans, there's like probably 50, 100 million of them worldwide. They will spend $10,000 to go to a concert in Argentina. I was there for a conference and like I wondered why all the hotels were full. Oh, there's a Taylor Swift conference going on. So there's a whole community of people that are into certain things that will go out and do things like that. So the two models that I think work the best are you find some like celebrity or fan or topic or some event that people really, really like. There's also honestly, like the Burning Man community or things like that, where there's an event that people do every year, growing out of that and people turning that into a lifestyle. There's also other bands. So like cultural things are definitely one approach that have gone that way. The other thing would be a pure online community where people are working. So certainly online games, there are certain games that people are completely immersed in, and like especially the multiplayer persistent games. There's a chart where like if you look at Silicon Valley startups that were created by people that were members or founders of guilds in like World of Warcraft, I think it's something like 5% of the people within a certain 5-year period were from those things. So communities like that, games that have that kind of social dynamic built into them, and then I think a lot of discussion forums on the internet have also created their own identity. Like certainly Cypherpunk's list for me, that back when the internet was like millions of, like low digit millions of people, and this was a 10,000 person list, it was a major force. There's also a lot of like the Bitcoin Talk mailing list was early on in crypto and was like a major focus of how that evolved. So I think a lot of discussion forums like that. So tools like that, and then groups like that that have periodic physical meetups or things like that is probably the fastest route. I think 2 minutes left.
So Tim Draper supported a plan for 6 Californias where you'd have Northern California, Southern California, Central Coast, and a couple others. But I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Would it enable like a more efficient government? Would it ever go through? Something like that?
I think U.S. politics are very complicated. I live in Puerto Rico, so I'm a U.S. citizen, but I live in Puerto Rico, and the best thing about living in Puerto Rico is I don't really need to care about U.S. politics anymore because I can't vote and I have another interest in them. But yeah, I think in general, I am a fan of devolving power as close to the individual people as possible, and a state that has 50 million people is more than the United States had at founding, and more than the United States had until like 1830 or 1840 or something like that. So the size of the biggest US states are really nations, and they're not set up to govern themselves like nations. At the very least, having a California with a regional government. One of the biggest problems in California is like you end up with a city like San Francisco that has 9 counties around it in the area. There's no real governance system at the 9 county level. There's only governance at the city level or at individual cities or counties. So you can't build like a regional transit system that's any good or things like that. So there's a lot of problems with having the wrong scale of government. I think there's obviously Dunbar's number, like 150. There's probably a group where you have maybe 10,000, 100,000 people that makes sense. anything above that is not evolutionarily something that humans really created. It's really something that economics drives. And economics, like the best book that I might actually go as far as to say this is the best book, but the Sovereign Individual book is essentially a book on how power structures and how military forces and everything else created government. Like, because the 1900s military system depended on having the biggest possible military of a certain size, of a certain force, you ended up with a very nationalistic, like communism, US-style liberal democracy, things like that, were the biggest possible blocks of people that you could have, and they created the most powerful military forces. That is the reason why we have systems like nation states that are hundreds of millions of people, and that's not necessarily the best for anything other than that particular facet. So, yeah. But yeah, I'm very optimistic that there will be changes in the US someday, but I'm not optimistic on any particular change. But Tim Draper is awesome, and there's also a cool Network Cities project that's happening near San Francisco, like in Travis Air Force Base area, where they're trying to build a new city from scratch, which is pretty cool. Cool. Okay, thank you.